You think you know British tone? You've heard the myths, absorbed the lore, maybe even watched a dozen gear reviews telling you that anything stamped "Made in England" is automatically a ticket to sonic paradise. And that belief, that comforting, widely shared assumption, is costing guitarists real money every single day. Here's the truth most gear channels will never tell you. The UK guitar amp market is littered with traps. Beautiful traps. Vintage-looking, impressively priced, historically prestigious traps designed to make you feel like you're buying legacy when you're actually buying a headache. And the 5 amps you're about to hear described as ones to avoid. Some of them have passionate fan communities. Some have been sold in flagship guitar stores for decades. Reputation, it turns out, is not the same thing as reliability. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which British amps belong in your signal chain, and which ones belong in someone else's nightmare. Let's start where the danger is thickest. The amps you should walk away from. The first amp on the avoid list is a name that sounds almost too British to fail. The Selmer Treble and Bass 50 has an almost mythological reputation among vintage collectors, and that mythology is precisely the problem. When these amplifiers were new, they were workhorses. When they're old and unserviced, they are electrical archaeology projects. Technicians who specialize in vintage British gear will tell you privately what they rarely say publicly. Tracking down original components for a Selmer in poor condition is a months-long commitment. You're not buying an amp. You're adopting a restoration project that may never sound as good as the price tag suggested. The second trap wears a more familiar face. The early 2000s reissue run of a well-known British brand, and experienced players understand which era this refers to, represents one of the most cynical periods in UK amplifier manufacturing. These weren't built to the original specs, they were built to the original marketing. Internal components were substituted without announcement, quality control became inconsistent, and players who bought them expecting vintage character found themselves staring at an amp that looked right but felt fundamentally wrong. Boutique repair specialists confirmed this repeatedly. The reissue era created a generation of unreliable amplifiers wearing prestigious badges. Third on the list is a category rather than a single brand. The short-lived British solid-state boom of the 1980s. Several UK manufacturers attempted to chase the American clean channel market with transistor-based designs that were, frankly, not competitive. They haven't aged into classics. They've aged into curiosities. The clean headroom is disappointing, the overdrive channels are brittle, and the resale value reflects exactly what the market thinks of them. Nothing. The fourth amp to avoid is one that audio engineers actively dread seeing on session bookings. A particular mid-tier British combo, popular in rehearsal rooms throughout the 1990s, developed a reputation for inconsistent output transformer quality. On a good day, it sounds acceptable. On a bad day, the output section begins behaving erratically under sustained playing. Gigging musicians have learned the hard way that "it worked in the shop" means very little when you're 40 minutes from home and the amp is cutting out between songs. Fifth, and perhaps most surprising, is an amp that appears regularly on Best British Amps lists and continues to be recommended by reviewers who've never owned one long-term. It produces a genuinely beautiful, clean tone. The problem is the reverb circuit, which in a significant percentage of units develops interference issues within 18 months of regular use. Players who rely on clean sparkle with natural reverb find themselves confronting a fizz problem that appears, defies diagnosis, and returns. Owners who've contacted the manufacturer have received varying levels of support. Technicians who've opened the reverb circuit describe it as a design that was finished quickly rather than finished well. The amps that are actually worth your money now. Here's where the story changes. The Vox AC30, the real one, built properly, remains one of the most honest amplifiers ever created on British soil. What makes it worth the investment isn't nostalgia. It's the top boost circuit, which produces harmonic compression unlike anything manufactured in the same price range. Professional session guitarists who've played everything describe the AC30's response under a pick as genuinely interactive. It responds differently depending on how hard you play, and it does so musically rather than mechanically. That interactivity is what you're actually paying for. Second on the worthy list is the Marshall 1987X reissue, but specifically the versions produced after the quality controls were tightened in the late 2010s. Unlike the cynical reissues mentioned earlier, this one was built with reference to the original circuits rather than away from them. Experienced amp technicians who've compared original 1960s Plexus to current production 1987X units describe the modern versions as genuinely close. Not identical, close. For players who can't access a vintage original, that proximity is worth the premium. Third is a less celebrated name that deserves far more attention. High-watt amplifiers, particularly the current production DR103, represent a level of build quality that most guitarists never get to experience firsthand. These are hand-wired to a standard that would embarrass many boutique American manufacturers. The clean channel on a high-watt stays clean at volumes that make other British amplifiers dissolve into chaos. Studio engineers who've used high-watts on major recordings describe them as the most reliable, most consistent, most dynamically honest British amplifiers in existence. The reputation is quiet because Hiwatt doesn't advertise heavily. That restraint should tell you something. Fourth, and genuinely underpriced for what it delivers, is the Orange Rocker 32. While Orange's reputation sometimes suffers from association with practice room rentals, this specific model represents the company operating at its most serious. The stereo power section offers genuine flexibility. The clean channel is warmer than the brand's typical voice, and the build quality reflects the original Birmingham-era ethos rather than cost-cutting. Players who've owned one for 3 or more years report almost no maintenance issues. That reliability, in the British amp market, is not something to take lightly. Fifth and final, and this is the amp that surprises people most, is the Matchless Clubman 35. Yes, it's expensive. And yes, Matchless is a California-influenced brand operating through British tonal philosophy rather than British manufacturing. But the circuit draws directly from early Vox engineering, the construction standard is exceptional, and the dynamic response under playing is precisely what guitarists mean when they describe feel. Players who own one rarely sell it. That's the truest endorsement any amplifier can receive. Here's what all of this reveals about the British amp market specifically. Reputation travels faster than reality. The story of a brand can outlast the quality of its products by decades. And the inverse is equally true. Genuinely exceptional amplifiers can remain undervalued because their story hasn't been told loudly enough. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribing means you'll hear about the next piece of gear intelligence before the marketing machine does. The question worth sitting with isn't which amp sounds best in a showroom. It's which amp sounds best in a year, after you've played it hard, trusted it on stages, and demanded it perform without apology. Because that amp, the one built to last rather than built to impress, is where British tone actually lives.